Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. The Red Bank Planning Board will come to order this 23rd day of January. The time is 7:01 p.m. Notice this meeting is being held in accordance with the public laws of 1975, Chapter 231. An adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by a notice sent to the Asbury Park Press, the Two River Times, and posted in the main lobby of the municipal building, as well as the borough website. Roll call, please.
Mayor Portman,
Here.
Alex Schroeder. Here. Dan Mancuso,
Here.
Tom Welsh.
Present.
Michael Ballard,
Here.
Leah Zoom. Thank you. Art Murphy,
Here.
Juanita Lewis is absent. Lou Demento,
Here.
here. Barbara Bose. Here. Christina Bodatakis is absent. David Cassidy is absent, and Frederick Stone.
Here.
Thank you.
It's open.
It's open, yeah.
Barbara.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We've got a couple of resolutions that we'll do at the end of the meeting. I want to thank everyone for coming. I just said to the mayor, I said, this is more people than we've had here in 10 years. So thank you all for coming. I want to take a moment to just thank the hundreds of people, both residents and visitors, that participated in all of the outreach and public meetings regarding the master plan. This is the first reading of the draft that our professionals are here to present to you. We are happy, as we have been for the last year, to take any comments or suggestions. We will not be adopting the master plan tonight. We promised at least 2 public meetings, so this is only the first. I also like to special thanks to all of the borough employees that helped and participated in this, as well as the governing body. We very much appreciate everyone's participation. This is very much your plan. This is very much for the residents, by the residents. And we are thrilled that you're all here tonight, both via Zoom and here in person. So I'd like to introduce our folks. Susan. Oh,
I just want to state that the meeting was noticed. This public hearing was noticed to surrounding municipalities, county. The county has received a copy of the draft plan in addition to the Office of Planning and Advocacy, Office of Planning Advocacy. So just wanted to say this meeting was noticed for this master plan.
fantastic.
It's on the record.
So we're going to start with our professionals from BFI, Susan Favati and her team. As they're going to make their presentation, and then we're going to have an opportunity for any comments or questions from the public. Depending on how that goes, we may limit time to 5 minutes if we need to. If we have plenty of people that want to speak, you are welcome to speak again after we move through everyone who has an opportunity to speak at least once. So Susan, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just trying to negotiate with this. Great to see you all here tonight. Thank you for coming. We are going to give a short presentation. We'll try to be brief, taking through the master plan. We're really here tonight to hear from you. So we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask questions, make comments. But we will get started with the presentation. Yeah. So we'll give you a quick overview of the process, take you through the vision, goals, and objectives. There's a whole series of strategies and recommendations. We're going to give you kind of the top line strategies. Everything's in the plan. We're not going to go into every single detailed recommendation because we want to make sure we all have time for questions. We'll talk about the small area plans, summarize those 3 small plans, and then land use plan, and then lastly, the implementation piece, the Q&A. So in terms of the process, this was led, we started just over a year ago, at the very beginning of January of 2022. It was led by a master plan committee with several representatives of this planning board, who is the only entity that can adopt a master plan. But the committee also included other folks from the borough, including your former mayor. Happy to see the current mayor here. The former mayor Pasquale Mena, as well as Shauna as your director of community development, and your interim business administrator, Darren Cobb. So the committee met regularly with the consultant team, that's us, BFJ Planning, who were also assisted by FHI Studio, who led the small area plans piece of the project and also took a good lead on community engagement. So in terms of the timing, this did start, as I said, just over a year ago. So we're going to end up right about a year or so for the overall process. We had ongoing engagement, which Christine will touch on in a few moments. Really throughout the process, certainly at key touch points, we had more intensive engagement, but it was ongoing. We took the first 6 months or so to really do a deep dive on existing conditions, trying to get a full understanding of where the borough is, what's changed since the last master plan, what are some of the trends and issues that we need to be thinking about, and what does that mean for the future in terms of recommendations. And then basically in the late summer through the fall, we really sort of honed in on the recommendations, the strategies, really thinking about everything that we've heard and learned from the community and about the community, and what that means in terms of the overall vision, the key goals and objectives, as well as the specific strategies and recommendations. And then we spent the latter part of the fall, really about the end of the year, pulling it all together into the plan that is before the board tonight. So overall process, it's a mix of quantitative and qualitative inputs. So we have a lot of data, and if you look at the existing emissions piece of the plan, it's a hefty portion of the plan. It's backed up by a lot of statistics, concepts from other sources. But we also really married that with qualitative analysis. We talked to a lot of people, we did site visits, we really tried to get a robust understanding of the borough, of Red Bank, and we kind of put those sources together into the actual draft strategies and recommendations. And they're organized, as you see here, about 5 different topic areas, which we'll go through tonight. That's sort of how the plan is organized. So, next slide. Yes, I'm going to turn to Christine, who's going to take you through some of the engagement that we did for the process.
Thank you, Susan. Hello, everyone. So I just want to walk through the public engagement. So throughout the entire planning process, we had various engagement opportunities with the community, including pop-up events, virtual workshop, online and in-person workshops. And then outside into the virtual workshop. So it's online and also available in hard copies as well. You see the bottom right was the landing page with 3 different activities that I'll go into more detail. And it was just to hear from you all about, priority issues, opportunities or recommendations that you would like to see in the borough. And outreach to promote this was to do e-blasts to project stakeholders, as well as to do the Red Bank Public Schools. And then also at pop-up events we visited, for example, the Red Bank Craft Fair, lunch break, and the Senior Center. And as well as speaking to local places of workshop to also get the word out about this virtual workshop. Okay, and here's just a deeper look at that virtual workshop. So here were the 3 activities that were online. So the first was priority issues, where you were just able to put on housing per se and give your ideas about housing. Second activity was share your great idea, or just any comment that you would wanted to make, open like a post-it note, and others where they're able to like it if they agreed with your comments. And the third one was love it or change it, which was a map that you're able to pinpoint a location and, for example, say, I would like the sidewalk right here. All right, so in addition to that virtual component, we had public meetings. The first was an online meeting to review the existing conditions. So Susan mentioned that data analysis and trends was explained at that first public workshop. June 9th, about 58 attendees. And then the second round of workshops was the purpose to share the draft recommendations after hearing from community members. And then we had 2 in October, 13th and 24th. One was at the Red Bank Middle School and the other was at the Pilgrim Baptist Church. And total of about 70 students. And then in addition to the borough-wide community engagement opportunities, we also met with borough staff, agencies, local community organizations, commission and committee members as well. And then here is a list of the topical groups that we met with. Public Works and Engineering, Public Safety, Parks, Recreation and Conservation, Zoning and Development, Cultural and Historical Resources. And for example, at that meeting, we met with representatives from the Historic Preservation Commission, And in downtown Red Bank, for example, we've got the Transit Center, and the Business Alliance and Visitor Center. And the youth, we met with Red Bank Middle School students. And lastly, Borough Council meetings, we met with each individual Borough Councilman. So here, capturing all your input as well as the data analysis. Here is the table of contents of the draft master plan. First, starting with introduction and process that we just covered right now. Second, the Red Bank vision, goals, and objectives, which I'll share with you shortly. And 3, Red Bank today, the existing conditions component that is also available online. And 4, small area plan summary. Susan will cover that. Strategies and recommendations. Land use plan and the implementation and the action plan to carry out the plan forward. Okay, so here's a look at the vision noted in the master plan. So vision, I can read it out loud, or you can all read it from your seats. But it's generally capturing all that Red Bank is: farming, small town, waterfront, diverse businesses, local community organizations, and just driving that inclusivity and diversity for Red Bank's future. That was story. Yes. Read it out loud. Yes, all right. Vision statement. Red Bank blends the best aspects of small town life with world-class cultural amenities, an extensive and beautiful waterfront, shopping and dining opportunities, a diversity of community and nonprofit organizations, distinctive architecture, and important historical resources. Our vision is that Red Bank continues to evolve as a diverse, inclusive, and vibrant place for people of all ages and walks of life to call home as well as visit, embracing creativity and innovation while treasuring the elements that make it such a special and attractive community. Okay, so within the goal of vision, there's 4 goals that came out of all of the diversity, and it's connected, balanced, equitable, and dynamic. And within those 4, we have objectives that just help drive and categorize all the recommendations. So in connected, it's to make sure the transportation network is for all users. The waterfront is meaningful and accessible. Downtown preserves the character of the various business areas. And moving down to equitable, preservation and creation of affordable housing, as well as access to parks, transit, waterfront, and municipal services. And lastly, strong neighborhoods. Moving over to balance, the blue one, smart growth with targeted infill that minimize negative impacts, as well as protecting that residential quality of life, and the preservation of historic and their cultural assets. And lastly, dynamic. So to mitigate and adapt to climate change impacts as a waterfront community. Next, improve long-term sustainability. And lastly, effective and efficient municipal facilities and services. And I will pass it on to Susan.
Great, so I'm going to spend a few moments on the small area plans, which was led by FHI Studio, our sub-consultant. We're going to present for them. So there were 3 small area plans, which were really intended to be kind of deeper dives into specific geographic neighborhoods or areas in Red Bank that were facing specific issues that we in the committee really felt needed a little bit more attention. And they largely came out of, very early discussions, but they were really very much informed by the public engagement, what we were hearing from the community about issues that they cared about, issues of importance. And so the 3 areas, which I'll get into more detail on, are the Sunset Park area, Riverside Avenue, the Route 35 Gateway, right as you come over the bridge, and then the area around the hospital. So for each of these small area plans, and again, they're a little bit more detailed look, and they can be used certainly by public entities, including the borough, but the county, the state, for making decisions on transportation, on land use, infrastructure in and around these areas. This is a guidance for them. They can also be used by local civic groups, neighborhood groups, people who live in and around these areas to have an understanding of, where the borough is going and what the borough's vision is for these areas. And then lastly, private entities. So the development community can be using these as guidance for what the community has said is important to them. The community said what they want in these areas. So it's important for all of these entities as good guidance documents. So the first one is the Sunset Park area. This is the former landfill, not landfill, it's the DPW recycling. It's heavily industrial, has a history of contamination. There are long-standing plans to make this into a park. It's a significant waterfront parcel on the Swimming River. It's a really underutilized piece of land on the west side of Red Bank. And so there have been long-term plans for parks. You see at least one image here. The borough spent a lot of time and money on this effort. And there's still a fair amount of remediation that needs to happen, but there's a lot that has been done. So a big part of this portion of the master plan was to really understand what has been done, summarize the history of the site, the history and the status of the remediation, get a clear sense of where the borough is, so that you know what more is left to be done. There was a deep review of the prior plans for the parks and waterfront access. There's a lot of research that went into this part of the plan. And then the outcome really is kind of a detailed action plan for Red Bank to keep advancing this project, to keep moving forward. And that includes funding sources. So a really great outcome of this plan was that action was made with the Monmouth Conservation Fund to actually pursue a grant on the borough's behalf. And that's the funding grant. So actual money may have come out of this planning process in order to advance this project. Secondly, we have the gateway as you're coming down on south from the Route 35 bridge. This is the area that we heard again and again in all of our public engagement. People would like to see it look better. There were lots of concerns about traffic flow. It's a very tricky area for pedestrians. The pedestrian infrastructure is lacking, to say the least. So again, a deep dive here. We looked really strongly at what is possible in terms of transportation. These are state and county roads in many cases. So there's limited, there's limited power that the borough has, but the borough can advocate for DOT to make some of these changes. So we looked at a range of options. I'm sure you saw one that was a roundabout on Red Bank Green. That was one of the options that we looked at. I think the plan really recommended not that option, but more limited approach that is more likely to be accepted by DOT. But it was looked at, a whole range of options were looked at. We also outlined a series of pedestrian improvements, better crossings, more sidewalks, really improving that area because we walked it ourselves. It's tough. It's tough to wait for all those lights, and in many cases, there's no crosswalks available. And then lastly, we looked at the land uses in the area. As these areas start to redevelop, there might be new construction. I want to make sure that it's done in a way that improves conditions, both aesthetically and in terms of flow, in terms of access. So there's some recommendations on site planning and design in and around the gateway area. And then lastly, the hospital. This is another issue that we heard about probably from day one. Lots of concerns about the growth of the hospital and the impact that that's had on the neighboring residential area. So one of the things that FHI really looked at is what is the status of the hospital, what's happening in the industry, what's happening in terms of this hospital, what is its tax impact, really kind of to understand the existing condition. So that was a big piece of this. But then moving forward, okay, what can be done to balance that need to support a major employer, to support a positive economic generator, but also recognize that it's right next to neighborhoods. This is where people live. We want to make sure that they're mitigating their impacts. So there's some recommendations on zoning changes, really cleaning up the bad uses, making clear what is and is not allowed, and then some zoning map changes. And lastly, really strengthening the buffers to the residential neighborhood. Okay, so I'm going to dive into the strategies now, which are organized across 5 themes. So the first one, which has the most strategies, you would expect that it's land use. A master plan is primarily a land use plan. There are transportation and other elements which are covered, but land use is big. So Here, yeah,
Excuse me,
I never say this to people.
pull the mic a little further away.
I see,
I never
Say that.
Ever.
This is the first time ever I've had to say to someone, pull it a little further away.
Oh, yeah, the other
It's better.
wireless ones, they don't use them anymore.
So the first strategy
Right, it
is really
Right.
recognizing that residential uses are
Right.
the primary land use. Really preserving and protecting quality of life in residential. areas. So things like buffers, and things like lighting and noise, and making sure that, these neighborhoods are strong and healthy neighborhoods. Strengthening connections between the downtown, the traditional downtown core along Broad Street. Also, as it's sort of evolving and growing into Shrewsbury Avenue corridor, the train station area, really thinking about these places as distinct but connected. So that you're trying to preserve the place of each area in a way that is healthy for a cohesive whole. And then sort of related to that is the train station, really recognizing that as an important asset for Red Bank, leveraging that as a focus area for revitalization. And one of the key recommendations there is to pursue transit village status, which the borough has been looking at for a number of years. Nextly is housing, really promoting diversity of affordable housing. There's a lot of options that the master plan discusses, thinking about things like accessory dwelling units, reducing minimum areas for homes to promote for smaller units. Lots of detailed information that would be part of your affordable housing plan. And then lastly on this slide, waterfront access. When we looked back at your master plans from like the 50s, we got sort of discouraged because it was the same things that we were recommending. So some of these things have been around for a long time, and waterfront access is one of them. So we really started to look at, well, why hasn't some of this happened? What can we do to try to advance this really long-held goal of waterfront access? And so we have some ideas in the plan really about mapping your easements, having an understanding of what you own and what you control, looking at funding sources, and really setting priorities for filling the key gaps. All right, more on land use. It's 2 slides for this one. So, really connecting with a small area plan, we looked closely at the hospital area and really looking at them as a partner to balance their needs with what the community is looking for and what the community is concerned about. And so we looked at some of those zoning changes that we talked about at the small area plan. Historic assets, we know you have many. We talked to the Historic Preservation Commission. So we have some recommendations that pertain to that area, including a new historic plan element of the master plan. It's been quite some time since the borough has done that. Public health is something that is becoming more and more prevalent in the wake of COVID. And so we have some recommendations here, thinking about just ways to adapt quickly when you have a situation with public health, thinking about how to have outdoor activities, promoting mental health, access to social services. And then just some sort of grab bag of recommendations, things like reviewing your ordinances on a regular basis, updating your signage and lighting provisions, looking at gateways, sort of the catch-all category for the land use section. Okay, the sort of next big piece, which we know is really important, is circulation and mobility. We heard a lot about traffic really throughout the process, and we experienced it too. So we looked at it both from the vehicular side, but as well as pedestrian and bikes. And so, the first recommendation is to really do a deep dive and plan comprehensively for this. The main recommendation here is that we need a new circulation element of the master plan. The last one was done in 1999, so a lot has changed. And we really want to encourage the borough to take a really deep view on that. And we have a lot of recommendations in this plan that would likely be part of that circulation element, but it may come up with other more detailed recommendations. So that's the first recommendation. But then the second one is to really be aggressive about complete streets. Complete streets means that the streets are safe and comfortable for all users. Obviously drivers, but also walkers, bicyclists, people of all ages and abilities. They feel safe and comfortable really throughout Red Bank. So we have a series of recommendations there about mostly pedestrian improvements, sidewalk plans, a whole network of pedestrian assets. We also have recommendations on bikes and transit, including more bike parking and infrastructure, working with New Jersey Transit to improve access to the station and the area around the station, even looking at bus routes as well. And then the last couple are more about the cars. So we did look at your hotspots in terms of crashes. We had data from the state, and really that sort of highlighted where you're having problems. And it's really a handful of intersections that you're all familiar with. And so we looked very carefully at those intersections to think about what could you do. And there's some suggestions in there in terms of concepts for potential changes. And then lastly, parking. There's been a lot done on that. It was just before COVID, the borough did a pretty significant study. So we're recommending kind of revisiting that, improving the efficiency of existing resources, looking at things like electric vehicle charging, parking, and then also your regulations themselves. Okay, next area is economic development. So we did talk with a number of representatives from the business community. And so the first recommendation or first strategy deals with really supporting your small business community. You have a vibrant community here. We want to make sure that it continues to thrive in a tough retail environment, but that it's serving your surrounding neighborhoods. So things like better communication among all of the different organizations and the borough, reviewing the business zoning to make sure that it's really giving the flexibility that people need, that it's being responsive to ongoing and emerging trends, but obviously also regulating appropriately. We looked at the Shrewsbury Avenue corridor in particular. That is a very unique area. And one of the things that we talked a lot about was making sure that it stays, a distinct area, of its own, basically, that it doesn't become sort of subsumed by the downtown as downtown sort of expands. So we looked at the potential for a special improvement district just for the Shrewsbury Avenue corridor. There's some zoning changes recommended, some design guidelines, really giving some attention to that corridor in a way that strengthens it, but also preserves it. We looked beyond your downtown core. You do have a series of more auto-oriented corridors. Newman Springs Road is probably the biggest one, and that was challenging because it straddles your border. But we looked at enhancements along these types of roadways, recognizing that they're always going to be mainly car-oriented. So what can we do to make those more pleasant environments? Can we make them more pedestrian-friendly? How can we improve those areas? And then lastly, arts and cultural. This is under economic development because we do see it as a real key driver of Red Bank's economic atmosphere. That you do have these major arts and cultural destinations. And so it's really important to support them, both through programming, through funding, public art, but also regulations. So things like supporting live work artist units. Next is community facilities, resources and programming. This is sort of the public side, public and municipal stuff. So we looked at parks and open space.
I was thinking this thing.
So we have one of the recommendations here is to
You don't have this one because I'm an adversary.
parks, for the most part, it's a more broad, high level look. We looked at connecting those resources that you have, things like trails, better sidewalks in and around the parks. In terms of overall space needs of the borough, including this building itself, there's a lot of work that's been done on really maximizing the space of the resources and making sure that they're adequate and that they're really up to speed. And then lastly, the school district, we did talk with them. They were very informative, and we are just recommending even more communication and collaboration as we move forward, so that when their enrollment trends change, that the borough is aware of that, and it's really a true partnership. Okay, the last category is sustainability, resilience, and infrastructure. So this is sort of the environmental piece, but both sustainability in terms of being more responsive to the environment, but also more resilient to future climate change. So, promoting energy efficient development, things like encouraging LEED certification and new development, reducing negative environmental impacts, dealing with waste reduction and recycling in particular. So, continuing to support recycling and as well as composting. Environmentally sensitive areas, you do have riverfront areas, you have some sloped areas, and these are important areas to protect. There's some work that needs to be done to better understand what we have in terms of the natural resources inventory, but also looking at the regulations on things like wetlands, steep slopes, stream corridors. Reducing impervious surfaces, that's a big recommendation. And then lastly, looking at your infrastructure itself, things like stormwater infrastructure, water, sanitary sewer. Some of it is aging and in need of replacement. So we want to make sure that there's a plan for that. So that was a very quick summary of all of the top level strategies. Each one is supported by some recommendations, many of which I mentioned. This is a map that I don't expect any of you to be able to read, but it's just illustrative. It's the land use plan, which basically graphically illustrates a lot of the ideas that we were just talking about. So, it highlights Shrewsbury Avenue corridor, it talks about making connections between the downtown core and Shrewsbury Avenue. You can see some of those things. So this would be the map that would be essentially a foundation for zoning changes that the board can talk about, and then the governing body might adopt it. Because none of that will change with the adoption of this master plan. This is really the first step. If the borough wanted to pursue zoning changes, that would be an additional process, but this really lays the foundation for that process. And on the next map, it's a little bit more detail. And again, I don't expect you to read these words, but this is a summary of the half dozen or so recommended zoning map changes. Nothing terribly significant, but a lot of it is fairly targeted and really gets at, implementing the recommendations throughout this plan. So there's a map that summarizes all of this in the plan. And then the last chapter of the plan is maybe one of the more important ones. It's a full list of all of the strategies and recommendations, and it's an action plan. It's kind of a to-do list for the borough. And it lays out each recommendation in terms of general timeline, short-term, medium-term, long-term, who might be responsible or involved in terms of borough departments, or even county, things like that. Kind of categorizes the trees as, is it a regulation change? Is it something that's Is it a capital item like a park improvement? That might be a little bit more long-term. Is it another study? That might be more long. So it kind of categorizes those, and it'll be helpful for the borough during the years to come to kind of refer back to this periodically to see how they're doing in terms of implementation. Maybe not a lot of information, but let's turn it back to the chair, I think.
Thank you, Susan, very much. And thank
Thank you
you for being the first person ever to hold the microphone too close. You
do.
you really do.
So first up, I'd like to know if anyone from the board has any questions for Susan or Christine about the presentation. Okay, so folks from the public, I very much would love to hear what anyone has to say. I'd like to start with questions. There's no real hard, fast rule about how we do this. So we're going to kind of do it like we do an application before the planning board. I'd like to focus on any questions for the professionals that you have. And then at some point, we'll get to comments by themselves. But if someone has any questions for our professionals or for the board, please come forward. Just give us your name. You don't need to be sworn because this isn't an application, and you're welcome to come up, take a seat, and use one of the microphones. Mark?
Just in case.
Just tap it.
No, it's good.
There you go.
Hi, Cindy Burnham, 71 Wallace Street. I am having a hard time. My concern is the hospital spread into the historic residential zone. So could you tell me where have you made changes in regards to the hospitals? I mean, originally I had heard that the hospital was supposed to stay the north side of River Road. Now they've come across and they're going down Spring Street, which is all historic. People own their own homes. And so what has changed in regards to that?
Let me jump in real quick and just make a comment. Everything in this report are recommendations
Right,
for the town to consider. So keep in mind that there are no changes that have happened yet. These are recommendations that the town should consider. So great. Sure, go right ahead.
Right, and like I said, we heard that probably from our very first meeting with the committee about the hospital. Now there's some leaping over. It's two different zoning districts right now. So where the main hospital building is itself is the medical services zone, and then across the street it's BR1. And so in theory, they shouldn't be allowed in a different zone. So one of the things that we recommended was really looking at those permitted uses in the two zones to make sure that they were very clear about what's allowed in the MS versus the other zones. So that these hospital related uses that perhaps things hadn't been updated in a while with zoning definitions, but hospitals have certainly changed. And so they were sort of fitting into old outdated definitions. that we're kind of allowing them to creep across. So it's really a lot of cleanup in terms of, you know, what you're permitting and not. It's things like, even when you have something that's permitted, like a medical office that might be in an existing building, right? An adaptive reuse of a house to a medical office. That's generally considered a good thing, right? It's preserving the existing building. But you want to make sure you have buffers, that you're looking at, you know, the impacts of that operation. So that's kind of the main thing. Otherwise, we also talked about, you know, better advocacy and communication with the hospital on public waterfront access to really open that up. Behind the hospital.
Oh, do you know that we sold them our only public program because they complained.
Sandy,
Let's stick to questions. Commentary can come later.
yeah, I know.
Listen, I'm the funny one.
If I had to summarize it, it's mainly a home. Really clean up that.
So it's going, one side of the highway is for the hospital, the other side should stay residential.
Could stay for, you know, some ancillary uses that are more in keeping with the residential zone.
Right, but when you're tearing down 3 Victorians and another business on that whole corner of Spring and Front, right, for a medical building, what would you?
So we looked at actually having slightly different approaches for if it's an all new building versus reusing an existing one. And so just try to incentivize that reuse. So that's another thing.
Thank you.
And as far as
Going up Spring Street, I don't think, I'm speaking for me, but I don't think anyone is interested in seeing current residential uses on Spring Street flipping over for the hospital. That's just me talking. I would not want to see the houses behind Welch Farms or behind that one professional office use that's across from Welch Farms, that one with the cool archway in between. After that is all residential housing. I could not imagine, and I can speak for me, I have no interest in seeing the hospital take over any of those houses. So that's.
There's someone single family that's not changing and that's hospital uses, including offices, that really shouldn't be allowed. Damage is done.
Does anyone else have any questions?
A very quick question.
Just please let us know your name and
Joan Weatherell,
speak right into the microphone, please, Joan, because we've got people at home.
Needed, but I just have a very quick question. You mentioned talking with Red Bank Middle School students. Did you talk to students from Red Bank Regional High?
unfortunately, we're not able to make that meeting happen. We tried the scheduling. We tried many times to make that happen. It's something we would recommend that they continue to be watching the process. It's a little trickier because that school is not all Red Bank. So with the middle school is really kind of simple. We talked directly with the principal, they identified some students, and a great meeting. We had a lot of back and forth with the superintendent, who was very cooperative, but we just unfortunately in this time frame, we're not able to make that high school meeting happen.
So you're gonna continue to try to make that happen?
We won't because our role is
You're done.
but we would recommend that they be brought into these discussions on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
Come on up, Ben.
Ben Forrest, 16 Locust Avenue. So, over the years, I've been concerned about the exceptions and what I consider spot zoning that's been made over the years for projects. So I kind of want to know that what has been done here so that we, so developers, residents know more precisely that, this many story thing can go here. We've had developers sit on properties and kind of hold the council and, in my opinion, kind of a blackmail state with us to keep it empty unless they get what they want. And they want. So one of the things I hope is a more precise document that, so that we all know what the rules are and we don't wind up doing what amounts to spot zoning, which is disturbing on several levels. Obviously if there's some land project, I guess the town would have to wrestle with it, but that's been one of my frustrations actually for the 20 years. Various things we've had here wrestling with issues. And so I kind of like you guys on that so that we have less exceptions and weird things happen around that type of stuff.
Everybody here, probably want to say that. So it's tricky because you know, an owner could always ask for a variance, and that's their legal right. Master plan doesn't change that. However, you know, we do try to be clear on what the zoning does and does not allow. And a couple of the things that we recommended in the plan with the committee was really trying to focus a little bit in terms of where the development should occur, future density and development, thinking strategically about that. We talked a lot about the Monmouth corridor, West Front Street, but these are important links between the downtown core and the west side of the borough. That if you're going to have some development and maybe some greater density, that should be focused there. So really trying to target it so that it's a little bit more known from the development perspective. That it's not just sort of hands on the map. The other thing that we looked at is the rehabilitation designation, which is your sort of area in need of rehabilitation that's been designated for most of downtown Red Bank, not the Broad Street area, but really everything else. It's very broad and it kind of allows the developer to come in who's got some property within there and make a case. So one of the recommendations we had is maybe shrink that a little bit to a more targeted area so that you can be more strategic about where you want the development to occur. It's not sort of anywhere in this huge area. It's more targeted so that it's predictable as well. So that's kind of how we approached it. In terms of a variance, I mean, somebody's always got a right to ask for a variance. It's really on the the land use boards to determine those.
Can I ask more than one question?
Yep, get right in the mic though, because keep in mind, we've got people at home. I know we could hear you in the room, but they won't hear you if you're not close to the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So getting to the park on, West Side Avenue. I saw a very elaborate picture there, and I've been to some of the meetings over the years, which seems to be going on forever. I don't know what I want there. I'm a West Side resident. I mean, I don't know that I can do something want to, what kind of Disneylandish to me, very developed. Is this recommending some sort of very elaborate, detailed kind of thing, or we're going to have a lot more process? My own kind of thinking is I would like a little less activity there. I want it cleaned up.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly if I want like soccer fields and a running track and artificial turf. I like waterfront access. But I saw a picture there that looked very Disneyland, so I'd like you to explain it.
Yeah.
Susan, let me hop in real quick. First of all, I'm a huge fan of Disneyland, but the Sunset Park area is a very long-term thing. And the first goal is to try and get some money and some grants to clean it up. It is heavily contaminated from all the years of the use that was there. So I don't think anyone has an idea yet about what we'd like to see there beyond some kind of park, some waterfront access for sure. And the first step is cleaning it up and probably, and our engineer could jump in if need be, but we need to clean it up and stop any more leaching into the river. Those really are the first steps, is getting money, cleaning it up, and then stopping any of the contamination from leaching into the river. And the cleanup, by the way, is from what I understand, is not necessarily removing everything. It's like in many situations, they cap it. So those are very much our first steps. Beyond what the park could look like, I don't think anybody has. There certainly is no hard plan yet. And Susan can comment on the artist's work there. I think it's a very long way away from getting anywhere near that. But when it comes to the time of what needs to be there, I think there will be many public meetings about that. And Susan, by all means.
It's not a lot I would add to that, but just to say that the image that you saw on the screen is just illustrative. There have been prior to visioning and planning studies done by the borough. That was one of them. There's another image in the plan that looks sort of similar, but it was another kind of idea. It's just something that's happened in the last 10 years, but this plan focused mostly on, as the chairman said, the cleanup, getting the borough to that point. It's a significant effort that is still remaining to remediate that park or that land. When the borough is at that stage where it's clean and you can look at what uses you might want there will surely be a very big visioning process with the neighborhood and the whole community.
Well, of course, the picture got my attention, but also you made a comment about how you're applying for money, potentially money. And that's why you got my attention on the Congress wants to fund this, and how much detail we have to provide. And I'm a little concerned about locking this in. So, that's why I'm here. I'm listening and hearing. It's a huge piece of property, and I certainly want it cleaned up and made safe and have clean water. But you got my attention, looking through the report and hearing it tonight. And you are talking about funding, so it's something, I think it's a reasonable thing to ask.
Absolutely. So the funding at this point is for the remediation and the cleanup, and I'm not an engineer, so I can't speak to the details of the remediation, but in terms of funding, they're not looking at specifically what the park looks like, what are all the uses, is it a playground, is it a field, is it a path? It's a park use, and so you're remediating it to get to that point as a park. And so that's really what the funding is focused on, is that cleanup and remediation.
As an example, if someone wanted to develop that and put housing on it, it's a completely different remediation plan. It's a much more intensive kind of remediation. No one's talking about that. The idea is that someday this will be some kind of park, but first we need to clean it up.
Okay, I got it. So can I do another question?
You get one more,
Go on more.
and then we'll come back to you later if you have more.
Okay, the Route 35 corridor coming into town, you guys were nice enough to walk, I walk there regularly too. And then there's the property that's been approved for things and then unapproved and then run out and then nothing's happened there. So I'm kind of curious about what you're doing to address, I guess specifically the property, if you're coming into Red Bank from Middletown, that would be on your right, used to be an Exxon station years ago. That was gonna be a Hampton Inn or something, and now there's a large proposal on the other side. I don't know what the status of that is. And that whole area is kind of a visual. Well, it's pretty ugly way to enter our beautiful town. So I know you were looking at that, but I didn't hear any kind of specifics. I'm kind of interested really in what you're talking about with that. Are you guys gonna recommend that we make that a public space and put trees there or something like that? Or is it gonna be, another Hampton Inn wants to come in, do it?
So it's private property, is the first, and that is an approval. That site you're talking about is approved for that incident. So that has not changed. They have an active approval. I don't think that anything's changed with that.
They do.
Got it.
You can thank the state of New Jersey and the Permit Extension Act for that. But yes, it is currently an active approval,
Right.
much to my chagrin.
So we know that that's sort of out there. And then what can we do in terms of other properties that might come in for revitalization? And that's really what the plan is focused on. Sure, better access management, better aesthetics, stronger design, cohesive connected area. I would say focus really heavily on the pedestrian infrastructure to make it a safer and more comfortable place to be.
Thank you very much. Those are my two questions.
We've kept, hold on. Yeah, sir, you had your hand up first. Come on up. We've been collecting easements for 30 years. So
Bridge here. Stephen Act for space very high when I chatted that. And there's reference in the draft to the delineation between the east side and the west side. Specifically, my recollection is that it is the references in terms of physical availability of transport. In my time as a resident here, my experience has been that transportation is not the issue that separates the west side from the east side. And I'd like to know what thoughts you have with respect to so-called east side, west side, downtown areas, and how they can become part of one entity instead of three different entities.
Well, you're a long-term resident, you know the place better than I ever could. I do understand that there's a lot of history there between the east side, west side. They were just sort of different places, different patterns of development. So that's certainly a historical perspective. We do see the train line as a big divider. And the fact that it breaks up the street grid and it makes it difficult to walk. We've certainly experienced that ourselves. When you're walking down Monmouth, you kind of get stuck at this at-grade crossing. It's all of a sudden feels a little bit wide open, less safe. And that's a real visual barrier for the pedestrians and bicyclists in particular. So a lot of our recommendations do focus on improving those sidewalk areas. In terms of other connections, I mentioned it earlier, we are focusing on Monmouth as something that's kind of already starting to happen in terms of, new infill development, connecting the traditional downtown core with the train station and then on to Shrewsbury Avenue. So we think that's something that's sort of been in prior master plans as a corridor to focus your development on that corridor. We think West Front Street is sort of another one that makes logical sense to kind of bridge those two areas. But one thing that we did focus heavily on in the plan is to make sure that they do still remain distinct areas. That it doesn't all just become sort of downtown Red Bank. We do think that the Shrewsbury Avenue corridor is unique and is serving a specific market, and we want to make sure that those uses and businesses are not pushed out. So we have some recommendations on that front as well.
Thank you.
Suzanne?
Suzanne Visconti, 25 Cedar Street. In the report, it mentioned that there's 10% of our land is tax exempt, about 111 acres in a 1.7 square mile town. Is that something sustainable if we have more tax exempt entities come in? And is this comparable to maybe other towns with this 10%, or is 10% seem high? Square miles.
I mean, there's sort of no hard and fast rule. I would say maybe you're a little high in comparison with communities of your size. It's not necessarily pure negative though, because when you think about the tax exempt properties that we have, some of them are themselves economic drivers. So, arts and cultural destinations, for example, houses of worship are certainly valuable community assets. So it's not necessarily a pure negative. And there's not kind of a magic number as to how much tax exempt land a municipality can accept. It's something to kind of keep in mind. I would say if you were 20, 25, you might start to have concern because you're a small area with limited available land. But I don't really see it as, some looming problem. I think that you have some really strong, great cultural nonprofit uses that are contributing a lot to your community.
My second question is, we spoke a little bit about the redevelopment. And in the past history, you probably know about where the visiting nurse center was. There was some debate. I think they asked for tax lien for 30 years, or tax levy for 0, tax levy for 30 years. Have you seen that work in other towns that used it to help redevelopment? Or your opinion as far as pros and cons?
It's used a lot. It's used in many, many towns. It used to be more in the cities, and now I'm seeing many, many suburban communities use it. So it's definitely a tool that can be very helpful for the community if they've got a really tough site that's been sitting there and nothing's sort of happening on the private sector. It can be a good incentive for the developer to do something. It's with any tool like that, with any incentive, it's something you want to make sure that you're using intelligently. And so we talk in the plan a lot about smart growth. And that's one reason why when we're looking at the rehabilitation area, which I think that property is in, done through that rehabilitation designation. That's one reason why we were looking at maybe shrinking that down a little bit to be targeted, make some things happen on the properties that you really want to see things happen on. And then later, if you want to see continued revitalization, it can always be expanded. But right now it's covering a huge area of downtown Red Bank. So we recommend sort of dialing that back a little bit.
Now, one thing I didn't see in this plan was any, maybe I could have missed it, any input or acknowledgement about the new marijuana laws and selling in your town. Am I correct that there's nothing in there specifically?
There's nothing there specifically because I think you've already taken action. I mean, every community was under a pretty tight timeline to do that. So it's been done. I would say it probably would fall under a general category of your business zoning. So it's sort of in there in a broad way, but we didn't really touch on it specifically because the borough sort of just did that.
Right, and I think what just happened at the zoning meeting, it seems to be a little stuff good, so, thank you.
I mean, there's nothing in this master plan that precludes the planning board or the governing body in the future from fixing a zoning problem that comes up. It would just have to be consistent with the master plan, but the goals are fairly broad. So it's meant to be a living document and to encapsulate a lot of potential zoning issues.
Mary Ellen Mess, 95 Hudson Avenue. You mentioned in this document that New Jersey Transit has a designated developer, and I was wondering who that is.
I don't work for New Jersey Transit, so I don't think I can divulge their developer, but they own some of the property around there, and that's who they're working with.
I was surprised that that's a done deal because there had been some coverage in the media about a local developer that was in negotiations, but I didn't realize it was a done deal yet.
I mean, it's on Jersey Transit side, and they also own a lot of the property there as well, so.
Yeah, there's no deal here. If there's a deal, it's with New Jersey Transit, not with this board or the Borough of Red Bank that I'm
It's
aware of.
stamped.
Okay, I just want to know that.
So,
Also, you mentioned, underground parking, as, something to be encouraged. We've had a few, one new development, one new building that was actually built and one that's been approved that have under building, parking, which in my mind creates a big dead space on Mechanic Street by the Globe Court intersection. So I was wondering, do you make a distinction between underground and under building parking?
the recommendation is mostly about being efficient with your parking and trying to minimize the surface parking. You're absolutely right that there are design impacts. And so maybe that's something we can tighten up a little bit, because we certainly wouldn't want to have unintended negative consequences, but it's really about more efficiently using your land so you're avoiding significant areas of surface parking.
Okay.
I mean, from that perspective, there's not a huge distinction between underground or under building, but certainly from the design perspective, there can be.
Okay. One of my own personal concerns is affordable housing, and I know that it's a bigger issue than Red Bank. But I was very concerned about one of your recommendations to create more affordable housing by allowing for smaller floor space. And our zoning board, in its wisdom, has approved a number of buildings where they're actually below our zoned minimum, including one that's right on the corner where 31 of 32 units are actually going to be undersized if it's ever built. And my concern is that there's nothing in this document about, the needs for families with children, and the fact that, children need open space and public spaces. In fact, the biggest unit in this building that's proposed for the corner of Pearl and Monmouth is it's a 3-bedroom on the 3rd floor with rooftop public space, which in my mind is not suitable for families with children. So I'm just wondering why there's nothing in here about really making the town really for families with children.
Well, there's a lot of moving parts, the whole affordable housing piece. I will say from the state's perspective, there are requirements for families that the borough will meet, has met, in terms of number of bedrooms and proper mix of that, so that will continue. I think on the family side, we look at a lot of existing neighborhoods and existing affordable housing that's there. Maybe it's not officially designated, maybe get officially designated so the borough gets credit for it, but it's already there. These are established neighborhoods where we know that families already live, so that's one piece of it. On the small units, I would say you're already seeing that the market is sort of calling for that in the downtown, that the demand is there for smaller units. Your current minimums are promoting things like 1,000 square foot apartments, which we're just not seeing in downtowns anymore, and they're quite unaffordable when you're looking at new construction. So that's not the only answer, and that's not really getting at the families necessarily, but it's one piece of affordability. We're trying to encourage smaller units in the downtown core. In conjunction with everything else that the borough is already doing on it.
Okay, and in relation to that, you have a suggestion to explore collaboration with the Red Bank Housing Authority, and our housing authority, of course, does work very hard to meet the needs of families with children. But they are in need of upgrades and repair. And you mentioned as an avenue for this is capital projects, capital partnerships. And are we talking about private public partnerships? Because that to me is a big red flag, because you know, every time we talk about development in town, we're like, oh yeah, like let's do Marine Park and the developers will give us money. Well, you know what? Developers only give you something to get something in return. And you know, the land that some of this public housing on is river side land that is very, very desirable. And I would really like some caveat in this document that really emphasizes that these properties that are highly desirable, you know, be set aside for everybody and not just for the people who can pay for it. So I was just wondering if, you know, what you mean by that private partnership.
So that one in particular with public housing, there's a lot of funding streams now through the federal government that is encouraging these public-private partnerships. They're very structured. And one of the things that we say throughout the plan when it pertains to public-private partnerships is smart and thoughtful. Just because it's a partnership doesn't mean it's a good one necessarily. So, but that's an area in terms of public housing that more and more public housing authorities who are facing a lot of the same capital problems that yours is, that they are looking at tapping those federal framework programs that are providing that funding source. So it's very specific to that piece. It's not going to sort of give away the housing authority property for private market rate development. It would really help them with upgrading what they have and making sure that they continue to serve that market.
You have to forgive me, but I'm really a skeptic. And a large part of the town was designated as an opportunity zone, which I didn't see referenced in here. Everything south of Oakland and west of Maple Avenue is an opportunity designated as an opportunity zone that has you know, some incentives for development that doesn't really have to address the needs of the underserved population, which is the reason it was designated as such. So I'm just wondering why there was nothing in there. And also you mentioned 3 redevelopment zones, but I'm not aware of any redevelopment zones here in Red Bank. The one that was proposed for the V&A property was denied. And so we do, yes, have this rehabilitation zone, but there is a big distinction between the two and a big distinction between what the tax incentives are. So are there 3 redevelopment zones here in town? Because I don't know of any.
I'm not sure the reference. I know we talked a lot about the rehabilitation area.
Yeah, I'm not aware of
Any either. We have rehabilitation areas, yes, and I'm not aware of any tax incentives currently for anyone.
Right, so I think it might be a typo then, because I do believe I read that, but you know.
But we'll definitely double check it.
You can find the page and send it to Shauna. We'd be happy to write that in this.
All right, it's a long document
I
and
understand.
the type is very small, so, okay, thank you.
Thank you. And if there are at any point in the future, any public-private partnerships regarding housing, it's a long process. It's an incredibly structured process. And if the housing authority owns property that is meant for affordable housing, as Susan said, no one is going to give it away for at-market housing. And anything that happens with those partnerships goes through your land use boards and your mayor and council before anything were to happen. And no one's going to give away public land that's meant for affordable housing to be market rate housing for the money.
Well, I like to keep these issues, you know, on everyone's mind, because in my opinion, the deck is stacked in favor of developers. And they come to these meetings with lots of paid consultants. And let's face it, we're not consultants, they're people who get paid to come and tell the story that the people who are paying them want to hear. So when these projects are going to cause traffic problems, you know, they're all going to be great, they're all going to be this, that. So I'm just a skeptic. And I really think that property that the housing authority owns is extremely valuable over there on the river. And put a park in there and boy, people are going to be chomping on the bit to get this.
Thank you.
Does anyone else from the public have any questions? Come on up, Cindy. Get right into the mic, please.
Cindy Burnham, 71 Wallace Street. I had a concern. So this is. Where's our library? Mary Ellen? That's the library? No. Oh. Right here. This is the library. So what is the blue all around here? Is that supposed to be water?
Waterfront Development Zoning District exists,
And this is the library.
yes.
Okay, what's this? Purple thing.
These are the
Oh, this is,
it's a priority waterfront walkway segments along here. You see where it's hashed and where we'd like to get the walkway in the future, where it's in bold, is really the low hanging fruit that we're recommending first as priority.
river walk,
Yes.
which will never probably happen. But you don't want to think, okay, this is like a nature area. We don't want to see a river walk there. So, I mean, you're talking about open space, you're talking about green space. So I just want you to keep that in mind.
I mean, it's a great point. There are varying conditions along the waterfront, and a riverfront walkway will look differently depending on what your context is. So in a nature area, it might be very low intensity. It might be not even paved. It could be very passive. In other established areas near the downtown, it might be a little bit more structured. So it's not necessarily dictating a particular design. It's just saying this is where ultimately we'd like to get some public access all along the riverfront.
Anyone else have any questions? Ben, you threatened us with an extra question before. Now is your opportunity.
Well, I did, Mary Ellen, this is Ben Forrest, in Locust Avenue, did ask about affordable housing and I kind of, so. I would like to see more affordable housing in Red Bank, and is there any specific components in this plan? I haven't finished it, I'm reading it. That will help us solve the affordable housing challenge on a small way here in Red Bank.
There's no one answer, and so there's a lot of different recommendations. So one of it is, in terms of low hanging fruit, restrictions that you currently have on affordable housing, the housing that is affordable now and is protected and recognize that you continue those deep restrictions, you have to stay on top of them. So it's something that the borough needs to continue to make sure that that's maintained. We looked at things like clearly there's the housing affordable set asides with new development, but that can't be the answer to it. So you have a lot of apartment housing, older apartment stocks, buildings that were built in maybe the 70s, early 80s. Those may be fairly affordable in the market. They're just not counting. And so more and more communities like yourselves with small land area and not a lot of available land are looking at, can you use your housing affordable trust fund monies to buy down some of those units, dedicate them, deep restrict them as affordable housing in existing apartment buildings. So you're not getting new construction, but you're getting protected for 30 years, 50 years, whatever the life of the term is. You're getting them protected for affordable housing. We looked at things like allowing smaller units downtown. We looked at potentially on deeper lots, allowing accessory dwelling units. There's no like silver bullet answer because it's a very complicated subject area. So you kind of have to try to tackle it on lots of different fronts. And we gave about a half a dozen or so recommendations that would be part of an affordable housing plan as well. And there may be other opportunities that arise, but it's got to be a sort of a multifaceted approach because again, there's no one single answer.
It really bugs me that now if I were looking for a house, I couldn't afford to move into Red Bank. I'm sure Amy and I are not alone in that. Okay.
And Ben, just let me interrupt for a minute. There's two things to think about. There's affordable housing and there's housing that's affordable. And that's the real problem because you and your wife probably make too much money to qualify for affordable housing. But there's that housing that's affordable is a real problem in Red Bank, as my kids remind me on a regular basis who want to buy houses here. That there's those two things. For the state has helped us out with an affordable housing law, and there needs to be a set aside for all new development so that we have affordable units in new development. But as Susan said, there's money out there that we have to hunt down so that we don't have to get all that affordable housing with new development. Because every time someone comes in with a building, there's someone that doesn't like it, me included sometimes. So there's money to rehab what we have, but the bigger societal issue is housing that's affordable. Meaning people can just afford to buy a house that's not necessarily designated as affordable housing with a deed restriction. That's a problem well beyond our purview here, but nothing's going to come here and get approved without the required amount of affordable designated housing in Red Bank. I wish things were more affordable in general. I really
Yeah,
do.
my daughter's looking at a job in New York, but they have to live in Pennsylvania. Like, okay, you talked about traffic. You know, and the traffic study, and we're looking at that. And somebody said earlier is, everybody always says that these development doesn't affect traffic. And, you know, there's been pretty dangerous traffic on Shrewsbury Avenue since I've lived here since 1996, and it's probably worse, I would say. But is there some specific thing in the plan where, what's your assessment of what's happening traffic wise in Red Bank? I know you talked about it, but I didn't hear, or maybe I missed it, you know, well, we think, you know, this will do that, and this will ease it, and pedestrians will be safer here. You did say pedestrian safety, but I didn't hear any kind of vision about this kind of overall Red Bank traffic challenges that we have. And maybe it's not fixable, and if it isn't, to say it, I guess.
Well, not all of it's easily fixable, because not all the roads are yours, so you gotta work with the county and the state to start with. And this isn't a circulation element, so it's not gonna get into the level of detail that plan might, and that's why doing that plan is a big recommendation. But we do look, if you take a look at the draft plan, we look in detail at about 5 or so intersections where there were the highest crash rates, and some of them were particularly bad for pedestrians. We looked at crashes that involve pedestrians. Those are the most concerning ones, facing injuries. And so we do have some clear recommendations specific to the intersections. It's things like sort of the Broad and West Front area and that sort of stretch east. It's the whole Riverside Maple strangeness that happens where it's almost like a jug handle that you have to do with Pearl Streets, that whole kind of area. So there are some recommendations for potential traffic changes in terms of lanes, crosswalks, sidewalks, you know, but they're concept plans. They would have to be engineered. You need to study the counts and all of that. But this is really trying to put you on the path to look at those intersections in detail in partnership with the county and the state. We did. But yeah, take a look. There are some specific intersection improvement recommendations there.
Oh, thank you very much.
And as far as pedestrian safety, it's key. And the mayor and council's even, as you know, is acting now with it. There's been 2 new 4-way stops added. There's been a lot of pedestrian bump outs added. And I think that's going to continue. As Susan mentioned, the state and the county are big players in this situation. But Shrewsbury Avenue, it's worse. There's no doubt it's worse than when you moved here, without a doubt. A fair amount of that is enforcement, which I know is happening on a regular basis. Down the road, should there be some pedestrian bump outs to improve that? Without a doubt. You know, but the county gets involved in that. You lose parking spaces when that happens. But I think that this is going to be a commentary that never ends in Red Bank, is finding ways to improve pedestrian safety. And I think it's going to be a little bit at a time, like happened on Broad Street when there was some money there to make that happen. 4-way stops when we can do that from a safety standpoint, and Shrewsbury Avenue when we get the county involved to do it there as well. And I hate to say it, but enforcement's going to be on the top of that list in my mind, probably forever. And everybody knows streets and towns in the area where you would never speed. And it's because Patterson Avenue in Shrewsbury is a prime example. Shrewsbury, I bet, hasn't given out a speeding ticket in a decade there, because for a while, they probably gave 10 out a day. and everyone remembers it. And I think enforcement needs to happen everywhere as well. To really kind of, you know, I hate to use that analogy, but you got to use a stick sometimes to get people to do something. And enforcement is part of all of those things that we need to do a better job of.
Enforcement's a big one and money too, but so there are low hanging fruit areas, particularly in streets that you saw, so within the neighborhoods, there's pretty basic stuff, even, you just need better painted sidewalks. There's a lot of changes that have happened in recent years as to recommendations on which kinds of sidewalks are more visible. More and more, we're doing this sort of zebra stripe instead of just 2 solid lines. Those are much more visible to drivers. So these are fairly simple things that you can do, as part of an ongoing capital improvement plan in the borough. That doesn't touch Route 35, that doesn't touch some of these county roads, but might make a big difference in the neighborhoods themselves.
Yeah, I like the speed bumps on Lake Avenue. Thank you.
Does anyone else in the public have any questions for our professionals?
Joan Weather on 106 Manor Drive. With respect to the pedestrian safety, continuing that, can you, off the top of your head, identify the 5 areas? And do you, this is a compound question, do you address the issue of additional lighting? Because it's been my observation that there could be a lot better lighting at some very busy intersections, particularly along Maple, where it intersects with it's the one that goes down to the train station. Chestnut, thank you, Maple and Chestnut. That's a very dark intersection and it really needs a light on both sides. There've been a lot of pedestrians there and I find myself crawling when I make that left turn.
That's a great point. This is just an example, and you can't see it kind of in the sense of what it looks like. This is West Front Shrewsbury Avenue Bridge. We kind of have the railroad tracks that come, it's just a challenge, flagging the crosswalk on one side. There's the Riverside Maple Pearl Front. Yes, it's just a challenge. There's some recommendations there. Let's see. East Front Broad, as I said, where it's sort of footed broad, and sort of either side as well. There's some changes there. In a small area plan, we look at the Rector Place, Godman, and Route 35. That's a key part of that small area plan. And there's some recommendations there. And then lastly, this is one that's been previously studied, but Broad Street, Reckless Place, and Harding Road, right near Middle School. You just have like a lot of streets kind of coming in at angles, and there are recommendations actually for a small roundabout. That we think still bears study. Be a good approach for that intersection in particular. Slowing traffic down, driving a bit better, making it safer, especially for the students. So I think those are the ones that we really drill down into, because we did identify in some maps as well. Like they're real clear hotspots in terms of crashes and incidents.
Thank you.
Everyone, Nancy Blackwood, thank you for Chestnut Street. One thing you mentioned with pedestrian safety too was the state of the sidewalks. And right now, from what I understand, the sidewalks are maintained by the homeowner. So therefore, if you're walking and we are an older neighborhood, you'll see some of the slate sidewalks and then you'll see some that are cement. In other towns, have they ever looked at the opportunity of maybe having the municipality own the sidewalks, for want of a better word, and then just the homeowners are just required for, keeping it snow free?
Yeah. It's an issue for many, many towns, and a few of them do it that way. Many of them do it the way that you do, where it's the responsibility of the homeowner. And it makes it a challenge to ever get it if you don't have a sidewalk to get it built and then certainly maintain it. So it's something that you could look at. You have to change the local law. It's sort of not zoning. It's probably regulated in a different part of your code.
Right, but it interrupts complete streets.
Absolutely. So the recommendation here is to develop a sidewalk plan for where you're lacking sidewalks, but also to develop a sidewalk maintenance improvement plan. So identify where you do have those gaps where it's important. poor condition, it's a hazard, whatever.
Okay, sure, because one of the basics is that, complete streets should be wide enough that two wheelchairs can pass each other. And we don't have a lot of them.
Many areas don't.
Right, and the other thing I would just recommend when you guys are considering lighting, please remember wildlife friendly lighting. That's it, thank you.
You know, as far as the sidewalks are concerned, there's a couple things to look at. When houses sell and an owner has to get a certificate of occupancy, code enforcement has an opportunity then and to look at the sidewalks. A really egregious sidewalk could be a requirement for the homeowner to fix. Because the sidewalks are technically, in many cases, depending on the public right of way, part of the borough, but the responsibility of the homeowner, doesn't mean that if we happen to have a ton of money lying around, that we couldn't put new sidewalks in everywhere. All we have to do is figure out how to pay for it. So it's doable. As an example, where we pave streets, if the sidewalks are in horrible condition, the town puts in new sidewalks. But that's all part of a street plan, and I think we'd all be happy to have new sidewalks. We just have to figure out, as so many things in life, how to pay for them. But I think that's a fantastic comment.
Mr. Chairman. Nancy? So at one point here in town, there was an effort to try to get some kind of, as we enforce the sidewalks, because there were so many, that there would be an effort to do some type of a tax so that the borough could get same contractors and make it a little bit less expensive for people while they still owned it. And it never really got carried through. So we're starting again now to start seeing even more sidewalks than that 10 years ago, obviously. And some of them are really challenged to enforce. That may be something that you might want to do with Complete Streets as your committee to the council, and something that you could work together with on that with enforcement as well. Because like the chairman says, when we go out and we do these turnovers, if somebody's selling their house, obviously they need to do that, right? But there's so many of them, and it's a problem. So that might be better than anything.
And in some cases, it can be a financial burden on a homeowner who can't do that themselves. It can be very expensive. Anybody knows any cheap masons, let me know, because it's not easy. And in many cases, sometimes it can cost you a tree if it's a giant root that is causing the problem with that. So
it could be the borough's tree.
Could be our tree, which is probably a good thing if it's our tree, because then we have to pay for it. But so it's a big thing from a Complete Street standpoint to a safety standpoint to a financial standpoint. I think as we do the road program every year, there's opportunity to do a little bit at a time. Other questions? By the way, I didn't think we'd have more than 10 people tonight, so I'm really thrilled that you're all here, if I haven't said that yet.
It's 10 online too.
And 10 people online. That's a huge win. And Lord knows Suzanne's probably got 500 people on her Facebook page. Can't take questions online. It's really just too much trouble. If people are welcome to email Shauna or comment, we'll happily read them. But it is a logistical kind of nightmare to do comments online. Councilman Ballard, I know you're here. Do you have any questions for anybody while we're here? Any comments you'd like to make?
Thank you, Chairman. No, very helpful discussion here. A lot of good ideas, a lot of good information. So thank you. I apologize for not being there, but I'm sick as a dog and I don't want to make everybody.
Well, that we appreciate.
Thank you.
Anyone else, any questions? Come on up.
Bill Gazelle, 11 Harrison Avenue. I just have a question. Are we going to get notification of the next meeting? Are these two young ladies going to be there?
The next meeting is February 6th.
Okay.
We'll notice for it. I'm telling you now, it's February 6th, 7 o'clock. And we're not done yet tonight, so we'll see if there's any other comments or anything. But there'll be one more public session on February 6th, barring any substantial changes that come from that. We will probably adopt the master plan at the end of that meeting.
But I can get access to this. I haven't read this.
It's on the borough website. You're welcome to download it. It's 168 pages.
It's on the homepage.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, so now's the fun part. Does anyone have any comments they would like to make?
I just wanted to, I've been pushing council and this body for master plan for a while, as have many, actually. And I just wanted to say thank you to the volunteers, particularly here, for going through this whole process. I have to say I was very impressed when I was at one of the market days that River Center runs, and I'm walking along, and it's one of the employees of these companies. And it says, hey, you know, what do you think, how do we make Red Bank better? I appreciate all the reaching out. I'm still digging through the whole report. I'm planning to be back on the 6th, maybe with some more specific suggestions and ideas. But thank you all for your commitment to the town to do this, and I know it's not easy, and it's appreciated. That's it.
Thank you. The public outreach was the most important part of why we hired these professionals. Not that they weren't good to begin with, but the public outreach was key to us, because really with the hundreds of people that contributed, that's where the great ideas came from. So thank you. Anyone else have any comments they would like to share? Come on up.
Stephen Hecht, 135 Branch Avenue. There's just something that I want to make sure gets onto the record. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Public Library. And I am speaking now as a trustee for the library. In your report, you make reference to a Red Bank Public Library Park. Let me give you a little history as to why that presents a serious problem for the library. The library was deeded to the town in 1937 by the Eisner family, sons of Sigmund Eisner. And one of the caveats in the deed is that there never be a park at the library. And so we are in danger of losing our library unless you strike that and find some other way to refer to whatever it is you're referring to. The land behind the library that belongs to the library is used for library purposes. There is wonderful grass. There are beautiful benches. There's a magnificent river view, but it is not, will not, should not ever be parked. So I want to make sure that we're on the record about that. That's
You can grab me after and point out the page reference. I thought we'd gotten all of them out. So thank you for that.
It's 55.
55, okay. So make sure
Table 11.
fix that.
And whatever references to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We did think we had all of those, so thank you for pointing it out.
Mary Ellen Mess again, 95 Hudson Avenue. You know, I have to admit, I'm just a glasses half empty kind of girl. I'm not somebody who comes in with rose-colored glasses. I'm always looking for the flaws, and I do try to be conscious of it and be positive, but I gotta say, I'm a little bit disappointed with this document. I know it was a lot of work, and a large part of it is just a compilation of stuff that has been floating around for years. I think, you know, there are more than 20 reports, investigations, plans that are referenced in the document. And I think it would be helpful to prioritize some of these recommendations, because some of them are going to cost a lot of money that, quite frankly, we don't have. Some of them are very vague. I mean, yeah, every community needs more mental health services, and if you don't believe we need them, come into the library because we have a lot of patrons who could use them. And I don't say that in a disparaging way, but rather, there are a lot of needy people here in Red Bank and they use the library as a refuge. And we deal with them every day. So, and I think that some of them there are some good ideas in here. I like the idea of trying to get a handle on what's going on with the hospital and addressing that through zoning. I think that's very important. And I also think to try and keep pedestrians safe, very important. But so I really think, you know, this whole thing, when I looked at it, it was very overwhelming. And some of the recommendations are rather vague. So what I would really like to see is, you know, some kind of, if either this body or the council really prioritize in terms of like what is most important and what is actually doable within a time frame. Because some of this stuff, quite frankly, if it ever comes to pass, I'll probably be dead by then. But though I like to think of myself as middle-aged, I'm quite well past that. So anyway, those are my comments. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Keep in mind, the master plan is a guide. It's intentionally vague on some things because it's not necessarily an action document. It's a guide for the land use boards, it's a guide for the mayor and council, and it's a guide for future development in town. And legally, it kind of has to be that way because the state says we have to do it on a regular basis and re-examine it on a regular basis. And if someone comes in for a development and takes into account from this guide, we call the master plan, and they take some things that we've said we're interested in, it allows them to get an idea of what the town is interested in seeing. But this is not a to-do list because there's no money associated with this. This is a document to lead the boards and the council and the residents towards what we'd like to see. And some of it is some big pie in the sky stuff. There's no doubt about it. We've been talking about Riverwalk forever. And, you know, for decades, we've been grabbing access easements to the river as we can over time, but the town doesn't have the money to build it. None of you would want us to spend that money, your tax money, which is where it comes from, to do that, because it doesn't necessarily impact everyone. But there are, for whether it's Sunset Park or traffic improvement or better sidewalks, it's a matter of prioritizing how that money is spent year after year and where we can go after grant money to make things like that happen. And so think of this, please, more as a guide moving forward. And I hope we all live to see the good stuff done in here. I really do.
I want to make a comment on what she said, because I tend to agree with her.
Put into the mic a little bit.
There you go.
Say it again. There you go.
As I read it, there are many recommendations. Some of the recommendations at the very end don't jive with the recommendations in the document. I would have thought that the table of recommendations at the end would have been the same as the ones in the document itself. So it got a little confusing. But aside from that, I think it's our job to prioritize, and your job too. It's not their job. They pointed out what's going on in town. They did an excellent job. But to come in and just say, you didn't prioritize, that's not their job. I think at the next meeting, we should look at this and say, in a positive light, okay, there are a lot of recommendations, dozens. Maybe we should boil it down to the 10 most important ones, the 10 ones in priorities. Not just us, but you too. You got until February 6th to do it. And just say, okay, and maybe you have other recommendations that are not in here. But at least look at the ones that are in there and think, what is this important to me? Is this a good idea? Why we should prioritize it? You know, I'm thinking an example, you say that, you know, when developers come, the town, when they built that White Street parking lot, that was a disaster in my estimation. They got a picture of it in this document. It looks horrible. It looks like a wasteland. And they had trees there. It was doing well. But for some reason, in spite of the fact that we have a shade tree committee that opposed it, that said, please save some trees, you walk through there and it makes Red Bank look like a wasteland. And I think we want people to come to our restaurants. We want them to park. We want to have parking spaces. But we also want it to be an attractive place when they come, for them and more importantly for us. And you walk through that and you do not feel proud of Red Bank. I'll tell you that much. And so I'm saying we should have about 10, maybe a dozen, I don't know, maybe more, maybe less, priority items. And then the town, when we make decisions, we should take them into consideration. Because in the past, the plan has just been turned around to whatever way a developer wanted. And we basically, either that or we just ignored it. So, and as an example with the parking lot. So I suggest, in a positive light, everyone look at the document, look at the recommendations, see which ones you agree with, and when we come back, and us too, and when we come back in February, we come out, and then we have these major items, and then it becomes an alive document, so that when the town makes decision, or when a developer comes, we can look at this and say, this is a priority item, and you are either adhering to it or you're not, and we would like to see it that way. So that's my feeling, because I've been around for 30 years, and we could go over this banging our heads over and over and over for the next 30 years. And unless we, take the bull by the horns and come up with our own priorities, it's going to be like this. It won't work. So that's where I stand.
Thank you. If anyone has any priorities or anything, as we've said, Shauna's email is on the borough website. Please email any of those ideas, any of those comments. The whole point of doing 2 public meetings here was so that we could hear feedback. So if you want to put any of the recommendations in order, or you have priorities or things that you think should be done first, please email them to Shauna so we can talk about it. Keep in mind that a lot of the suggestions are opportunistic down the road. We might not have an opportunity to do something with riverfront access until something happens that gives us a window to get to that. There are other things that we could perhaps do sooner, like better sidewalks, where money either becomes available or there's the mayor and council feels like there's something they want to do there to tackle that. So by all means, suggestions for priorities, please email Shauna.
I'd like to jump in on that one a little bit. I agree with that we need priorities, but I think that we should maybe have leveled priorities, because there are so many very good aspirational things in this that we should not dismiss. They have to be left in, but we might be able to divide it into, these are our top priorities for the next 5-6 years, which of course I understand the council is talking about a strategic plan, which might work into a strategic plan, for a 5-year plan that they're thinking about. But don't get rid of the other, the majority of the things, again, like Mary Ellen said, I'm not going to be around to see, but my grandchildren will. And I think that we don't have to get rid of what we don't think we'll be able to.
I don't think anybody's talking about getting rid of anything.
Just in getting rid of it.
Okay, because the way you were talking.
I don't know why you interpreted it that way.
Because you said you take like 6 or 7 things and
Yeah,
prioritize.
of course, because you're not gonna go from 100 to 100. I mean, that's, you got top things that you think someone here thinks, the top, everyone has different thoughts. But they probably think, oh, this thing is important. And then we look at it. That doesn't mean throw out the other 98.
All right, just as long as that's,
Well,
I did not interpret it that way. I'm sorry.
I think we're a little bit getting off of what this really is.
Right.
This is not a checkbook for what we're gonna do, what is it? It always, when I first came down here 50 years ago and I found the old master plan from the 1930s. And the main thing they wanted to do was to eliminate the grade crossing at Newman Springs Road and Broad Street. That was the #1 priority. We're still waiting. And this is the reality of what these things are. There was Broad Street to the river. I was in my 20s and I remember the JCs all wanted this. What happened?
Green Park.
Well, these things, you got to understand what they have done is a wonderful thing. And they've talked about various aspects of different issues, and some of it can be controlled by zoning. Some of it are just ideas that the town should think about, but it has no force. The only force that it has is that if there's going to be a zoning ordinance, it has to be in compliance with the master plan.
Right.
And even that doesn't have to be followed because the super majority of the council can override that requirement too. So we're just looking at painting a picture of what should the town look like and what directions we're going. And that's what it is. It isn't a matter, we're gonna say, this has to be done first. We have to do sidewalk, we have to do that. They all have to be done. And just give it some balance of what the master plan actually is.
Thanks, Mike. Suzanne?
I'm done.
Somebody listening to your comment right now reminded me of the actions we took. I'm a library trustee also and on the school board. I'm not speaking for either, but being part of their 5-year master plans and strategic plans, this seems like a great first step to put in front of everybody what needs and wants the town would like to see happen. So it's a great first step, and long term, when they get to the strategic plan, the benefit of having a strategic plan and this list of needs and wants, demand, helps tremendously when money comes in. And for us on both the school board and library board, when COVID happened, we were able to pivot because we knew what resources we had. We knew these computers were ready to go and we had a few more coming down the line. Or we knew we needed to get more computers so that every child in the school could get one, and we knew exactly how many we needed. So it really helps with decisions and, to your point, spending our tax money. One thing I wish if you could speak to, as you said, this is just an idea, but how would things come to be? For example, in some of these zoning and planning board meetings, developers would come in and say they want building X stories high, and then they reference some, I'm not sure the master plan or other things. If we are not saying we want a building in this town or a zone to be only more than X stories high, if that's a concern, to make it clear for developers to know where we are wanting to be at, not where we were, because every time they come in, they say, well, you already have this building and this building so high, you should be able to be that high. And it seems lately there's been some more pushbacks to have shorter buildings to keep that small little town feeling. So it'd be great for people in the audience and at home to understand how these ideas become law, I guess you could say. And just real fast too, you were speaking about the trees in the parking lot. We had the same problem at the parking lot where Jersey Mike's and where I think Ray Night was, when they put the new parking lot there, they took down a few trees. And I believe the shady tree said, there was a meeting I recorded, I want to say 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. A member specifically said, and don't quote me exactly, but I do have it on video because I thought it was amazing how they said, we're knocking down more trees than ever before. So I think we've lost some direction. And as many times we talk about being environmentally friendly and wanting to have trees and do this, it's kind of scary when actions aren't what are matching up to our words that we want. So I'm glad that you brought up that example, because that's one of many that has happened throughout these years. And like I said, there was a member of the Shady Tree Committee specifically said that. And I will pull that out because it was sad, because that's the whole point of making Red Bank this amazing small little town. So those are my comments.
Thank you. I'll address what you mentioned first, as far as zoning goes. So we've got, as an example, height requirements, minimums and maximums in every zone. And as Susan mentioned, whether it's the BR zone or the waterfront development zone, there are recommendations here for the planning board and the mayor and council to look at zoning restrictions and perhaps making some changes. And that's an opportunity then ultimately for the planning board and the mayor and council, who has to approve any change in the ordinance, to look at those things. So this is the starting point for that. And I think you're right. I think there is certainly some pushback on height. And the fact that someone's got one nearby that's 12 stories, that doesn't fly with anybody in town that you can have 12 stories. So the plan has recommendations for us to look at some of the zones in town: setbacks, height, floor area ratio, units, square footage, all of those things are in here for us to look at and move forward for changes. Does that answer your question?
No, it's, the process, so.
And I love trees. I wish we had more trees. I was disappointed with the White Street lot as well, which was not a function of this board. And there's a challenge always with, everybody needs more parking. Everybody says, not everybody anymore, but there's not enough parking. Well, maybe if we took out some trees, you'd have some more cars, and it's a battle. But I think we should definitely, and I'm going to talk to our professionals about this before the next meeting, about some reference to proper shade tree. And if there's anything we need to look at in the ordinance regarding the proper amount of trees. Other comments? Anyone from the board have any other comments?
What needed a motion to continue this public
Yes.
hearing to.
That being said, I'd like a motion from someone on the board to continue this public hearing to February 6th. We will notice again, but in case you missed the notice, take this as notice that we will continue this to February 6th. Do we have a motion to do that?
I'll make it.
And a second? Second.
It should be fun.
So we have Barbara and
All in favor of continuing to February 6th?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you again from the bottom of my heart, and I would like to give another big thank you to everyone who contributed and to Shauna Ebanks for really shepherding this thing through for the last year. So thank you so much, Shauna, for all of your help. Thank you, Shauna. And remember, if you have any other comments or suggestions, email Shauna. I'd be happy to take your emails. So thank you. We've got some resolutions to do before we wrap up, but I really appreciate everyone coming. There are 3, and I'm looking for them.
Are the blanks filled?
Yes, it was.
We have a resolution for 348 Shrewsbury Avenue, block 89, lots 19 and 20. That was the subdivision on the corner of maybe west side.
12-5 meeting.
That was from December 5th. Does anybody have any comments or questions about that? We have a motion to approve that resolution.
Make the motion, Chairman.
Second.
So that's part and part.
It's the mayor and Alex cannot vote.
Yes, I have a list of people that were all
Sorry.
at that meeting. Okay.
I cannot vote either.
Yeah, I'm gonna call out the people that were at the meeting. I have them noted, so.
Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Dan Mancuso?
Yes.
Art Murphy?
Yes.
Lou Demento?
Yes.
Barbara Bose?
Yes.
Fred Stone?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next up, 162 Catherine Street, block 71, lot 3801 from the December 19th meeting. Any questions about that? We have a motion to approve that resolution.
So moved, Chairman.
Second?
Second.
Was that Fred and Barbara?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Frank.
It was already.
You here?
All right, sorry.
Were you here for that?
Okay, thank you.
Barbara was here.
I don't remember.
I was gonna say, Barbara
Barbara wasn't here?
was, yes, she was here.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, please. Dan Mancuso?
Yes.
Mark Murphy?
Yes.
Lou Demento?
Yes.
Barbara Bose?
Yes.
And Fred Stone.
I thought it was a two-lot subdivision.
Last was, yes, there you go. Good for you,
That's what
Art.
I thought it was.
Next is 15 East Leonard Street.
Oh, wait, wait, just, was the last one 15 East
No.
Leonard or 162?
It was 162.
All right, so not the same thing.
Okay.
All right. go
So this is 15 East Leonard Street. This is, yes, this is the one with the electrified fence. It is not happening. It's not happening. That was some fun, wasn't it? I'll make a motion to approve that. We have a second?
Second.
Electrified fence.
Dan Mancuso?
Yes.
Mark Murphy?
Yes.
Lou Demento?
Yes.
Barbara Bose?
Yes.
And Fred Stone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again. Do we have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Second? All in favor?
Aye.
See you all on February 6th.
Nobody said second.
I thought you did.
Y'all want to stay here.